can change so quickly. Okay, so I'll move on to our assumptions now. So the first one, we're looking at this series of population and growth. And is there any way we can move that box, Tanya? Yeah. Can we move it to the top left? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we base these projections on Stats New Zealand. If you read the information in front of you, you will actually see the population growth in Timaru since 1996 has been 5,000 people. You peaked with immigration in the year 2020 when you had 490 immigrants move into the district. Last year, you had 0.0 population growth, which means for every person who came in, somebody left or died. You don't have a high birth rate in this district. That's not a space I'm suggesting council get into to address, by the way. Okay, not at all. So we're looking at a base assumption that it's projected to increase to 49,700 by 2033, reaching 51,000 by 2053, so at a 0.2% average annual increase. Keeping in mind that immigration and growth is suppressed around the country, but in Timaru, it's more relevant about your changing demographics in your population. And what the information is showing us is that your growth and pressure points come from industry. And I think you'll find people in the roading department who are addressing a lot of it will say the same, because it's about the big truck movements, about the increased traffic with flow, not so much about increased pressure on the housing market, because as has been reported, we have a decline in number of building consents. So it's not the population growth, but those things can change, which is why your LTP is reviewed every 3 years. So if you do have a surge in population for one reason or another, and I promise you, after the earthquakes, Selwyn certainly changed their population growth figures. And so did Ashburton, and so did Wymack. So events like that can have an impact, but at the moment, in the absence of anything like that, we're just basing it on past growth and the status quo. So it does conflict with aspirational figures that have been touted by agencies responsible for growth, but it's appropriate that they strive towards aspirations. You have to budget on what you say your population is growing by. So if you were to use an aspirational figure that had tens of thousands of people, you'd have to put in the infrastructure and budget for that in your 10-year plan. Comments, please.
But the developer pays for the infrastructure to install it. So if they are going to develop land, they pay for it. They take the risk.
That's not altogether true for all infrastructure. So all the services like the sewerage, the roading and what have you, a lot of those access things are actually put in by council to allow for subdivisions to happen, or the developer will do some of them, but we'll get Mr. Cooper to actually come and talk to you about
that. Thank you. Lucky me. It's a difficult conversation or a difficult topic to cover off, but what we have is in the Local Government Act as well as in the RMA, we need a foundation of evidence in data that we can point to and demonstrate in order to fund infrastructure that might be required for growth. Whether that's industrial or residential. Aspirationally, of course, we all want the town to grow because that makes us a more attractive place to live and attracts more people. The more people you attract, the more you attract. And also you attract those better schools, better hospitals, more funding from central government, etc. So that's the want. What we have in the statistics is a fairly, not flat, but a very, very slow increase in population over time. And that's provided by Stats New Zealand. So we have a bit of a tension between aspiration and what the stats tell us, and that's a difficult conversation for council. In terms of that aspirational stuff, if we were to build it and they will come, have that attitude where we provide an opportunity for growth, then in the absence of the private market doing that and taking that risk, because the margins are sufficient that they're fairly comfortable with the risk and that they'll make the money that they need to make, they would have come with private plan changes. In the absence of people knocking on our door for a private plan change, it would suggest that those margins are not quite there. So maybe this is a conversation through this LTP process for council to think about what are the levers that we can pull if council wants that aspirational view. But the levers will be de-risking it for a developer to partner with, for example, so that you can control outcome in terms of affordability of housing at the other end, but investing up front and taking some of the risk out of the equation to make it more viable for that developer to partner with council. So those are the sorts of things you can talk about to, I suppose, break the cycle, as it were, that's been described here. And I believe that was the wording in the executive summary of the Collier's report as well. It is a cycle that Collier's didn't anticipate much of a change when they looked at our market and placed us and had a look at our neighbouring towns as well. They said they didn't see us stepping away from that pattern that had been demonstrated over the last couple of decades. So if we are to break that cycle, there does need to be some sort of intervention, and it's either from us. And like I say, in the absence of a plan change from the private sector, that only leaves us at the table, really.
So I guess we have fixed infrastructure. Okay, now if you're saying if we open up more land and actually say allow private development, or shall I say development of more say sewers required, what capacity actually have we got? We've got a milling plant. What actually efficiency is that operating? Is it actually at 50% or is it actually at 100%? Because if it's at 100% and we're talking about building more houses and we need more poo processed, that means we do have to spend money on infrastructure. But other than that, if the developers are doing the paying for the development and the infrastructure in the ground to connect their systems to our network, that's not costing the council anything other than the opportunity to actually make an income and actually grow economically for our district. Because every house you build, you're going to create an income of probably 150 to 200,000 for the community. You're going to collect rates, and they're going to contribute to our schools. Okay, and when you talk about a private plan change and driven, now what is the time sort of delay on something like that? Is that like 5 years? Is that so? If a guy comes out and wants a private plan change and drives it, how long? What is the length of time for that to come to fruition?
That depends on the complexity of what's been asked, how it sits against the planning framework, what the evidence is for it to happen, and other factors. But if for example, a HOCA, is it a HOCA? It is a HOCA, isn't it? There's a plan change in a HOCA at the minute for a 700 section development for residential development. And if you go online and look at the body of evidence that's required for that plan change, you'll see that there's probably 10 or 12 reports there from independent subject matter experts supporting the different things that have to be demonstrated in order for that to go through. So there might be half $500,000 worth of reports there. And infrastructure is a consideration and a part of that process. So it's a plan change is not a small undertaking. It requires investment and effort, and there's sometimes you can't guarantee outcome unless it meets all the criteria of the planning framework, and that's self-evident in the information that's provided. So it's not simple. It could take 2 years. It could take 5 years. It depends.
Just in response to the actual capacity of the infrastructure, so our trunk infrastructure, our treatment facilities, etc., our trunk water mains, pipelines, they do have a lot of capacity still left in them. In fact, a lot of the demand is actually driven by industrial use. Very little is actually done by domestic use. So, water supplies, it really comes down to your firefighting flows are your big criteria there. Your domestic demand is minimal compared to that. So, we are in a really good space. As you know, we are looking at upgrading our Timaru water treatment plant, and that's not about increasing demand. It's about, supply. It's about being able to more about reliability and the fact that we can't treat water when it's dirty at the headworks. So we're getting more reliable infrastructure there.
Have you ever done any work around the benefits of actually building a house and seeing what the economic impact is on, you've got the infrastructure. What's that going to add and contribute to? And there will be a benefit cost. And there may be a deficit for a start. I'm unsure. But unless you probably start changing how things flip things around, we're going to just continue to be a retirement home. And so, we've got to change those settings. And I'm concerned to hear what I hear right now is it's not actually we've got an opportunity potentially, and it's actually the support's not there. But as a council, we need to be looking to actually shortcut that and actually make some decisions to fast track some of the activity. So I don't know. I just
Yes,
a little bit concerned about it.
I understand the sentiment, and that's been here since I started here, and I've tried to work within the rules to push as much as that can be pushed in terms of substantiating it in evidence. I can't go beyond what the evidence says in terms of land that we open up or don't open up for that purpose. What I will say is that jobs put pressure on the housing market, drive up the cost of housing, which then makes it more viable for a developer to get his margins or her margins out of that particular market. Money talks. If it was there to be made, developers would be doing private plan changes prior to us notifying the plan, or variations after that. So it's for the private sector. This council has taken the stance that it's for the private sector to drive those developments and pay for the infrastructure. That's been the stance. If we want to take a different stance as an organisation, then I think it would require some investment. That's just my personal opinion.
We've just heard
if you want to change the settings, that's where the settings are. You also lobby central government for a change in rules because that's where the rules are set and the expectations are set for the planning framework. And then the regional policy statements follow the guidance from central government, and likewise our rules have to follow the regional and national framework. So if you want to change those settings, there's very limited capacity around this table other than having skin in the game. So outside of that, it's a matter of lobbying, in my opinion, central government for some changes to rebalance, if you like, the tension between development and environment.
I guess you mentioned the cost to council for infrastructure. We know we've got the capacity, and the developer pays for the infrastructure to connect to our system. So therefore, you have to look at the income that the council are actually going to get. Obviously, there needs to be some input from council around public services and civic facilities for those new areas, such as, there needs to be a certain amount of planning. But, really, if we just keep saying no as to what I'm just hearing right now, this long-term plan, we're going to be sitting here in 10 years, a long-term plan, and the same thing is going to be being told to us. And that's not good enough. So I'll just leave it there.
One thing I'll just say, under the new development areas in the proposed district plan, it is council's responsibility to do what we call development area plans, and that is planning for all what infrastructure is required in those development areas. So that is, I guess, an assistance to any developer coming along and wanting to do the plan change relating to that land, that future development land. So we're doing a lot of the groundwork to assist them to get that plan change over the line.
Okay. To add to that, the whole point of these assumptions is to give a baseline by which you are doing your funding model for the next 10 years. They are audited by Audit New Zealand, and they check our data sources. So all this is saying is this is what the evidence is showing us. So our projections, which is not the same as a prediction, okay, it's not a crystal ball, it's just saying we're basing it on a 0.2% growth. If council chooses they want to take the risk and move into the development space based on aspirational information about growth projections, they can choose to do so, but audit will want to see very sound evidence by which that is based. And in the development plans, the future development plans, that will be the type of evidence that you can produce. So you could, by right, choose to actually start commissioning those type of projects to investigate and make a sound decision if you want to get into that space. But at the moment, for this particular LTP, given the commitments that are already existing for this council, our recommendation is we stick to a population growth based on the evidence that we have provided from us from New Zealand Stats for you to base this LTP on. And my question really from you is, are you comfortable with that projection at this point in time?
I think it's important to note too that with growth, we don't get any extra income. It's not like a business where if you sell more products, you get more income. With us, if we get that growth, it means that everybody has less of a burden over the rates we require. So effectively, people may pay a little bit less. So,
that's because I think I've wanted to juice him. Michelle almost had to wake me up. No, look, I'm a bit with Alan. We've got to be more enabling. We go by textbook. We go, we can't do this, we can't do that. The land we've got isn't flat, The areas that we're proposing changes things, but we seem to go back to the textbook and say, oh, well, these guys, they say our population's going to go. Burl, whoever figures we used last year were wildly inaccurate, but we've got to use them. Where's the joy of trying to enable things, trying to be at the front end instead of at the back end? That's my problem with this process, and I agree with Alan. Where is our aspirational stuff within this plan if we're just going to take all the textbook and all the standard steps everyone takes? We're not going to get ahead of the Mid-Canterbury's, North Otago's, Waitaki, Ashburton district councils. We're just going to trundle along behind them, and that's not where I want to be.
Can I just add to that before you answer? Because it's along the same theme. I 100% agree. I feel like we're on the bus rather than driving it. And Paul, you talked about if we want change, we need a circuit breaker. So what is that circuit breaker? And do we need to look at what are the barriers to development here, and maybe council sharing some of the costs of development? And I know that'll come at a cost, but long term it should come at a benefit. And I feel like we're not even looking at what that might look like. And perhaps because I just feel exactly what Alan and Stuart said, we're just going to do nothing and we're going to be ending up on the same trajectory in 10 years' time.
I can tell you from research from other areas around the world where they have population pressure, so declining villages and what have you, and the local councils will buy housing stock, sell them cheaply, with the requirement that people move to the district and actually revamp them and have a definitive time to actually upgrade those houses. But the council makes the investment and offers them cheaply so that they can get a population moving into. Nobody that I know of in New Zealand has tried to action anything like that. And you talked about the growth in Ashburton. I can assure you, having worked there, that was 20 years in the making. It wasn't an overnight success story by any stretch of the means. Their business development park that they had the motto, build it and they shall come. You know, we're 10, 15 years down the track and it's still not full. But it has grown steadily over time, and they did make the commitment and front foot it, and you can choose to do the same, but it does come down to what's the risk the council's willing to take upon itself. And you have every right to decide that risk for yourselves.
I wasn't suggesting council should be the property developer. I'm just suggesting that maybe we should share some of the costs with the private property developers to make it more attractive and increase those margins so they do want to come here and develop property.
You are one of the very few councillors that doesn't charge development contributions. There's financial contributions which aren't the same as development contributions because those are the incentives that other councils use to waive development contribution fees. So you can look at waiving your financial contributions if you like, but if it does mean that the flow-on effect is your ratepayers pick up that cost.
But then Andrew said the flow-on effect of that is it may become cheaper in the long term, and that's what I think we've got to look at is actually, yes, there'll be a short-term cost, but maybe the benefit long-term will be better. I'm not saying it will be, I'm saying we don't know, and we need to have a look at that.
That's the risk, yes, that you're taking.
And so what you can do through this LTP is actually to commission an investigation into that and provide you with some options. If that's the space that you actually want to go in for development in partnerships and look at something that you can do to be more proactive in that space, is by all means, this is the LTP to actually get that ball rolling if you want to do that.
Okay, on the back of that, that sounds good. So we don't forget about that. Who's taking notes other than us so we get a paper on that? Because this is my frustration. I rolled through this last time and we had the same figures and we ended up in the same place. I take your point about Ashburton, might have taken 10 years, but we haven't even started. You know, so we need some changes or else we're just going to plod on, talk about being aspirational and do nothing about it.
Councillor Peddington, I've asked Jess to make some notes for me so I can actually provide you with a written summary and we will define the actions that you've asked for to incorporate in the LTP.
Councillor Peddington, what about if we give an undertaking to come back with a report? Because obviously in a workshop environment, we don't want to be going down the path of making a decision, but we bring that report to either Environmental Services Committee or Council and have this debate with the potential then to make a decision and give direction.
Yeah, look, that'd be fantastic. And I realise you're doing your job and I don't have a problem with that, but it's just the same process we went through 3 years ago. We kind of talked about the same thing, being aspirational and enabling, and the feedback I get from the community is we're not. There's no more land available. You know, it's all scientific, but if suddenly we had 250 new houses, we might attract new people. There might be 250 more ratepayers helping ease the cost. But unless we step into that space, we're just grinding out a process, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's no disrespect to the presentation or where we're going. I want to be a circuit breaker and move forward.
So we will come back to you through possibly Environmental Services Committee for that report or possibly through development. I'm not sure yet, but we'll make note that you want a report.
So someone else might want to talk at some stage, but we'll see. I get all this. This is about us. This is about our aspirations and everything, and it all sounds really, really good and everything. We're going to have other workshops that say where our debt levels are at, where our vertical infrastructure is at, what our aspirations and of getting those done, and what we're going to do, and how we're going to cut our cloth to make that happen. We also need to know why these developers out there that have, hundreds of consented properties sitting there that they can manage to drip feed as they want to meet their requirements. What are the enablers for them to start getting them? What do we need to do so that we don't become the developer, that we don't incur a hell of a lot more costs on top of everything else we're doing? We need a big picture, and you're right, Councillor Pillington and Councillor Pye, we need to be aspirational. There are levers there that work against that, because we also have to meet the requirements of what the auditor says, that we can say, this is what we're going to do in this time, but how are we going to make it happen? So all those things need to come together, but at the end of the day, it's about us. If we want to do it, let's just get on and put the foot on the accelerator.
So, sorry, can I ask, do we accept this population growth figure based on stats, or do we want to change it? Because that's the key question.
So the question is, it goes back to our audit, because actually we can accept these for audit and go down a different path.
Yeah.
Because if the audit's going to question them, then we know and love our relationship with audit. But for the sanity of the finance team and the team within council, I don't think we put some hurdles in there for the audit process. So if we have to have these assumptions, I don't think that matters, because there again, to the point, in 3 years' time, hopefully we would have changed that, and in 3 years' time we'll be able to recognise that these assumptions have changed. So I wouldn't get too caught up on whether it's 0.2% and we do or don't agree with it. Yeah, personally.
Yeah, look, I don't think we can change the assumptions, because they are factual and they've got to be audited. Don't have a problem with that. I'm asking how we, as a council, and you as council officers, can break the circuit and move it forward. I've got no problem with the assumptions, because we've got no reason or ability to change them.
Thank you, councillors. There is a group of assumptions that you can change, but these external ones, population and growth, and the external things happening around the world and nationally, not so much, but the middle ones, which are about council operational assumptions, those are the points that you can actually tweak as to whether or not you agree and that's what you want out there, or you want to change the assumptions. So I'll just whip through the other assumptions in population and growth then. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one of the other drivers is a population dynamic around that increasing age group that are likely to retire. And so what are the triggers for them to downsize? What do? Are they rebuilding, or are they downsizing into existing properties? And what pressure or tension is there on retirement villages? We hear all sorts of rumours around the community about potential development around that, because if that's there and that's available and it's affordable, you're going to get people moving into that, which then starts to mean that there's stock of other houses available and those things. They're all key things that we need factored into there as well.
Thank you, Councillor Burt, which brings me to the next assumption, that is saying that your population is aging and will age significantly, and you're going to become more ethnically diverse. Still going to have an 85% Eurocentric population base in 2050, but you will have more newcomers coming to the district, which is why you have a Welcoming Communities program now, looking to build on that. So that's just, it is what it is, and we need to encourage more younger people to come to the district.
Yeah, I don't accept that. I've got some facts from our neighbour Ashburton here, and their growth rate is in the same period. Ours was 11.2%, theirs is 41%. They sold 1,000 sections, we were 50% less. Okay, yet our sales were considerably faster. So what I'm saying, there's a direct correlation there between having property and opportunities available for people to come and build at a competitive price to attract people. So your assumptions are based around not actually what's happening here at a local level.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure how that relates to what we were talking about.
Well, population growth.
Well, mine's based on Stats New Zealand. I can't find a more valid source of data, sir.
Well, I'm just comparing us to our neighbour who we actually compete with for people to come in and settle and contribute.
And they have got more growth, but that hasn't always been the case for them.
Well, they have had a lot more sections at a budget price to actually for people to come and get that and meet that aspiration, such as Rolleston people.
And they've invested a lot more in infrastructure in kind of semi-rural areas around there. So a lot of the people up there have been paying what they call half rates, which means they have the ability to connect onto a service because the services are there, but they haven't yet because they don't connect them until there's so many houses. So it's a whole different model of planning that they do compared to here at the moment.
And normally, you would actually develop a spatial plan, and that's what we should be doing as a long-term plan as to where our town is going to grow to. And therefore, we get the land activation for the plan change. It's in place because it's been identified. And then the property developers would normally come in and they would compete for that land. And they won't sit on that land because there'll be 3 or 4 of them, big areas, and they will cut it up and they will bring that on into fruition. It's not the government, it's not us, it's actually competition from actually property developers that actually you encourage when you actually have a spatial plan identifying where the town is going to go. And therefore you have control of where you have your facilities to meet that demand in the future.
I beg your pardon, Councillor Booth, I thought you finished. I believe the report that you've requested may highlight those things, but as most of the councillors have just stated, the factual figures that we have up there based on evidence and data from Stats New Zealand and Infometrics and .liv's data and a lot of other data collection sources that are well respected and recognized and audited, et cetera. They're not the things we can tweak. What you're asking for is what we can do about them. And I believe that's what the report will come and present to you about some various options. So at this point in time, because what this workshop is about is if you accept these as the base assumptions, what we do based on them will be up to you. But these are just the facts for the time being in this snapshot in time. And what you're telling me is you want to change this. You can't change what's happened. You can change what's going to happen.
Yeah, perfect. I think we keep going because we're on a deadline to 11:30, and at that rate we're going to miss it. But we'll pick that conversation up when we have that paper in the coming weeks.
Okay. And then talking about the household change. Now, we do know that we've had declines in our building consents. What we're trying to help set up is what are the types of houses being built, because if we know the pressure points isn't coming from people coming into the district, it means a lot of those new builds are from people within the district, either downsizing or going to lifestyle properties or what have you. So we're working with the building team because they have some brilliant statistics they give us, and it's just so we can differentiate what type of houses are being built and where. And that will actually help to inform the future planning that you've just asked for. So at the moment, we know that the average household size will decrease because families are getting smaller. And with an aging population, you'll have more single-person households. So we're saying that you're probably going to increase by about 280 houses a year, okay? So that's the basis for this LTP at this point in time. the district.
Yeah, that's district-wide, isn't it?
Yes, it is district-wide, so including Geraldine, Pleasant Point, all of those, yes.
Or just a and the increase in ethnicity and the decrease in household, because the cultures you're talking about coming, I'm not a cultural expert, but generally they seem to have larger households, so you're going to have more ethnical diverse, you know, that tend to have larger households, but our household number is going to decrease, so I'm struggling to understand that.
Well, the ethnic diversity, your growth area is your Asian populations, and they don't tend to have big families. So I know I live in a area in Christchurch with a lot of Asian families and one or two kids at most. Most of them are retirees, to be honest. So this assumption was based, of course, when we had stronger economic growth than the rest of New Zealand in 2022. 2023 up to June has shown that we're slightly behind. We have dropped, we've got probably about half of the economic growth that we had, but we haven't finished the full year as of yet. Our assumption that for the time being, your economic growth will continue to be stronger than your population growth, driven by the local industry and contributing to your low unemployment levels. You've had very good employment levels, even at times of people struggling to actually find workers. So Timaru has punched above its weight in this particular demographic and factor. So that's our base assumption. Are you comfortable if we continue along that line of thought? So the council political structure. Now we're getting to the council operational assumptions. These are the ones that you can change, tweak, omit. You can add something else. Something else. So for the political structure, our assumption, I'll go back. Our assumption is the representation review being conducted in 2023 will result in no significant change to the council's political structure. It may alter some of the boundaries of the voting areas, but we're saying that we still expect you to have the same number of representatives. And there won't be any amalgamation at this point in time with other councils for this LTP. Keeping in mind that if we do signal that you're looking at amalgamation, we have to show which year and financially and all the impacts for that in the budget. So we're working on the assumption, because that isn't an open discussion that's that I'm aware of, that we're working on the assumption that we're going to stay as is for the course of this LTP.
Can you just, for the public, clarify that that is just an assumption? Because when you read it, it looks like it's a done deal in consultation, and the process is a waste of time.
Yeah, no. The whole point of the representation review is to assess, do we have the right number of representatives per population base? And there's a lot of analysis that goes through comparing you to other districts. You did such a robust representation review about 6 years ago. And by and large, the feedback that we've had from the community is that they feel well represented by the numbers that we have. One of the things they may choose is about the Maori ward, but we don't see that the number changing, because you're right on point with nationwide as far as the ratio of population. The assumption is not a prediction, it's just what we're basing our financial model on. At this point in time, we're saying that the existing arrangements and CCOs are expected to remain in place, and new arrangements or CCOs are likely to happen over the life of this LTP within the next 10 years. We don't know what they are, what they can be. We're just allowing for the fact that they may happen. the next assumption that we're talking about is the level of service. Now, this is something that will become more and more critical as we go through the LTP, where you're looking at levels of service and the rating impact of them. So we're saying that we're anticipating through the assumptions, we're basing it that they're going to either remain at current levels or increase incrementally over time, slowly, with adjustments being made to those services to ensure the delivery. So if you're comfortable that we're saying we expect things to stay the same or improve, we will maintain that assumption as is, unless you want to actually address it and say, you may critically review it, there may be changes to the level of service. It's up to you if you want to change that.
Sorry, just a question on that.
Sure.
Are we excluding Three Waters from this process?
Yes, sir, Three Waters, we'll get to that coming up, but Three Waters legally does not have to be in your infrastructure strategy and is only needing to be in the first year or 2 years, depending on when your transition date is, in your LTP.
2 years.
Okay, well, but what's come out of the Merrill Forum is that the schedule from the DIA is that the 1st of July 2025 will be the transition for Canterbury and the West Coast. So they're saying it's going to be 1 year. So
I guess that my point is that would reduce the level of service because they're taking it off us, and who knows what might happen. And I mean, the government might change as well, but I just want clarity. So what are we picking just that we would increase service on?
we don't know yet until we have the activity management plans, and you'll see that when you make the decision, when you go around and have that AMP roadshow. If somebody's proposing to change the level of service, they have to produce a business case to actually show and justify that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool. And for the record, we will include the levels of service for waters for the year or years, 2 years, that we have it in the LTP.
I think what through that AMPS process would be good to understand for us is that officers give thought to what a change of service looks like within their group or part of council, and what the cost ramifications, i.e. increase, decrease, would look like. Yeah.
We have put in the AMP and business case template that they do have to quantify a change in the level of service, usually for an increase in the level of service, but if you're looking at where they can possibly make cost savings, that's about determining the value for money. And the difference would be between having a satisfaction rate between 90% or 95%. Is it worthwhile the extra investment that you do for that 5%? That would be the type of analysis that you would expect to see. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my point is, those are the questions that this group will ask, is around numbers, so be ready.
So for resource consents, we're going to say the conditions of new and renewed resource consents will be more rigorous and will likely take longer to obtain, and that's because of all of the RMA changes. And I think Mr. Cooper can attest to that.
More expensive as well.
I thought new RMA was supposed to make things easier.
The 900 pages of RMA has been replaced with about 12 or 1300 pages, making it far more simple. So we look forward to the new legislation.
So this assumption's based on your staffing levels and accommodation. And this one is a bit of a dichotomy because we're talking about staff numbers and accommodation needs will increase by the end of 2034. However, associated with the changing local government responsibilities, economic growth, and increased customer expectations. However, a caveat to that is if Three Waters indeed does transition out within the next 2 years, that will alleviate the pressures for accommodation in-house. but we don't know what that will look like because it may be for the new entity, they lease space here and keep the people here. We just don't know. So this is a funny assumption. We do know that you're going to need more staff because of the increased responsibilities from central government legislative changes, because it's traditionally what they've always done is that they make these new regulations that councils have to adhere to, and we have to enforce it or enact it, and it requires resource. So
I'm not sure I agree with that one, because on one hand you just said our LTP has 3 waters for 1 year, and then on the other hand you're going, but we will still have the staff, and I just, I'm not sure if I agree with that, and I just wonder if we're taking into account the changing nature of work and flexible working and working, you know, a lot of companies now kind of, you know, have office space for 80% and even lower of their requirements.
hybrid working spaces is almost the norm now, I agree. And if everybody employed currently at TDC was in-house for a day, there's not enough desk space as is now. If Three Waters does transition out, but remember, we don't know if they will physically transition out, as in the number of workers, or if it's just the responsibilities go. If they all go part and parcel, problem solved. That assumption isn't an issue at all.
I also wonder, is in this plan that we think about maybe having offices or kind of satellite places in some of our smaller communities that mitigates a lot of risk, also supports those smaller communities, could be a cost saving, and is that where we look at this rather than having everyone in one place?
You're talking about service centres, as is common in a lot of other councils.
Not just having the service centre people there, it also comes down to climate change, if you like, and that people aren't driving into Timaru all the time and they're actually working somewhere closer to their house. Some hot desks in Geraldine and Tomoka.
We had service centres in Christchurch where you had planners at the various locations, so people could actually go in for consent applications at those places rather than having to come into town. And, you know, we had a lot of other core services on site, so it is possible.
I think to your point, Councillor Pye, a point here, and this will be tricky, and how it will shape, I don't know that many of us have much idea yet, but the rise of artificial intelligence, and if anybody goes to ChatGPT and puts in material, they will see the speed at which it generates. Now, in a period of 3 to 4 or 5 years, you may well find that changes very significantly the dynamic, but it will also change the skills that are required. And I think we get to some of those assumptions later on, but I suppose there is a real dilemma here as we transition into this space about what it is that is needed. But at the present, I guess what we're saying is we're not going to move to a virtual environment. We're going to remain with a fixed abode, if you like, and there might be some satellite offices, and we'll still need people for front delivery of services in some shape or form. But what that shape and form will look like, of course, is the challenge.
I guess some of my question also is back to what Stu was saying before. When in this process do we have those conversations? Like, you know, are we going to get down the track and go, well, no, you all agree to those assumptions, so we're just going off in this direction? That's probably my challenge.
I would say when the AMPs come to you, because that's when you actually are talking to the activity managers, and perfect opportunity to actually raise proposals. The AMPs are not signed off until the LTP is signed off. So you have the opportunity to help shape some of those things. Okay.
To add to that, I think it's the AMPs that kind of give life to these assumptions, give them some sort of form where you realise how we look at it, an activity. So if we take, say, something like parks and reserves or libraries, we then say well, this is the area we need, because we're not projecting our population to double, we're projecting a rather incremental growth. So it's where you see those in the AMPs, that the activity management plans is where you see the life of these assumptions start to have sort of their leverage, if you like, or their traction.
It's just been suggested by Trudy that we could add to this assumption to say that it will be something regularly reviewed, and that we can we'll base the assumption of having a head office, and we can actually look to different delivery models, which would incorporate having some remote locations, hybrid, virtual applications, virtual meetings for consent applications, all of those kind of things. So we could actually add to that. And we can also add a clause to that about three waters. So saying that if this assumption's based on the three water staff staying in situ, or we can change the assumption to say that our staffing levels and delivery of services are likely to change over the next 10 years. Keep it that high level.
What about the possibility of a rationalisation of our districts, consolidation, I guess, and that potentially could happen within the next 10 years. That's going to turn everything on its head, isn't it?
Could you explain consolidation of what, sir?
Well, I think you'll find that as where the services required by local government councils to provide, there's probably going to be a rationalisation in councils, if you like, and areas being consolidated into, I guess, bigger districts. And so they are able to supply, because you probably, at this stage, the smaller councils are probably struggling to supply the services that are being required. And so there's a good chance, I would have thought, that within the next period of 10 years, that the boundaries will be extended dramatically, and we will be part of a bigger group, and that will change things dramatically from is there any consideration to that?
Well, that comes to our first and second assumption around the political structure, and because what you're leading to is about amalgamation and also shared service arrangements. And so what we're saying is, based on what we know now, because there are no definitive plans telling us that we're going to be amalgamating, keeping in mind that things can change, and if they do change, you have the ability to make an LTP amendment through any annual plan if need be, if it's a very quick change, or you would make the amendment in your next LTP. And for the shared service agreements, I know that we work in partnership with a lot of the smaller councils now to get better contracts and what have you, and our assumption is those will continue, and there's likely to be more.
I think the reality is, though, probably by the end of this next 10-year plan, that amalgamation would have to happen. You know, we're driving to more shared services now, but I would say that by 34, my pick is the councils be merged, these three at least. Yeah. But is it something we can put in the plan? Probably not.
Right, and so the last operational assumption was talking about the strategic and significant assets. In here, I have stipulated around
So Vincent, we will need to post-election though, just work through a few of these because they will are highly likely to change.
landscape.
Yeah.
A whole new landscape. Had to undertake. So, because of all of the uncertainty and so many changing, moving parts right now. So,
Sorry, just on those significant and strategic assets, from reading that background information, I think I remember this correctly, we talk about climate change and more significant weather events, but we're only talking about replacing significant assets as they need replacement. Are we allowing for replacement of damaged assets through climatic events? Because I didn't get the feeling that we were.
Yeah, we certainly are. You know, it's covered under the depreciation and our renewal program. There may be some changes in priorities to match affordability, but the intention is we continue to replace those assets. I think there is a conversation to be had around perhaps your lower level assets, your non-strategic, around halls, things like that, where there is quite prone. Do we invest in renewal of those, or do we just stick with them? Yeah.
When do we talk about that? Like, you know, when do we, like the halls, for instance, do we actually?
when you get to the budget, sir, because it will be about how much you put into those reserve funds and depreciation and whether they're at the right levels. You're scheduled to go through the budget on the 5th of December.
Yeah, Councillor Booth, we're bringing a paper on in October to Council about earthquake-prone buildings, Council-owned buildings and their status within that, against that. And I think that might help inform that conversation or be the start of it as well. So you could bring that into your thinking in terms of the long-term plan process as well.
Is there anything in there around the usage and the trends around the halls?
Is Nicole?
No, she's not here.
She's not here. I'm not certain, actually. Mr. Karen, are you aware of any work that's underway to establish the usage of those assets? It might be something that we do through the process, Councillor Booth. It's certainly part of the consideration in terms of, for example, if you've got an old 130-year-old hall sat there that gets used 3 times a year and it's on a strategic route, so therefore we're required to invest in it. You've really got to ask what's the value proposition of that at that time. So these conversations will be generated, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite important.
Stuff about what the government and the world's been up to. Affordable water reforms. This was written based on the legislation that has been passed and are now acts, so we are required by law to write our LTP under existing legislation. The mayor is right. Post the 14th of October, we could be revisiting these because there may be different legislation in play at that point in time. So as of now, we have made the assumption we will take the business as usual approach for years 1 and 2 of this LTP prior to us finding out that for Canterbury the entity was supposed to be 2025, which we will get more confirmation of that because that came from the DIA.
Came on Friday afternoon from the DIA.
Yes.
Yeah.
So not so helpful for us this morning. And then after that, Three Waters is out of the budget and out of the LTP. Okay, that's what we're basing it on for the time being. That is likely to change. Okay. Future for local government review. We have it on good authority that at the moment there are no anticipated changes, being considered by this government based on the future for local government review, so we don't see it impacting us at all at this point in time. And we'll wait and see what the post-election government decides. The Labour government has said, we need local government to tell us what it is that they wanted, which I kind of thought was the review, but so they're not going to take any action on it. Okay. Legislative reforms. So we are saying that the legislative changes are going to have implications for our increased responsibilities and requiring additional resources for us to implement and manage. We can't quantify those yet, as some of these legislative changes have only happened in the last week. They have been passed through Parliament, and one or two of them are still waiting royal assent. So we haven't had any chance to look at the significance of that at this point in time. Climate change. So what we're saying is that there's an increase of extreme weather events that will challenge traditional expectations and responses. Hence, Council's integrating climate change risks and mitigations in all its relevant activities and infrastructure management. And I'd like to take the opportunity to say that we have taken on board Councillor Booth's suggestion that what we're really talking about is resilience. And it's about enhancing the resilience of Council's assets, and our community. Thought you'd like that, Boothie? Okay.
Sorry, just on that, if we took into Napier and Hawke's Bay recently, we've got to be a bit careful because their councils just have to fund 50% with the government of the cost of the houses that have been red stickered. And I know there's insurance and everything, but you know, that could be $50 million. And I'm not suggesting that here, but if there was a major flood event, you know, what is our thinking around that going forward?
Yeah, I think Milford Huts is a classic example that could happen. Yeah, and, you know, if there was a major event, the erosion or something, you know, what is the position? It's something that, yeah, council needs to consider.
And keeping in mind, for every natural event, you have whatever government is in at the time on site, and those negotiations usually happen at the political level there and then. I know after the earthquakes in Christchurch, there were so many conversations going back and forth about who was going to pay for what. Same thing in Ashburton, same thing for every event here.
I think in the recent events, Councillor Piddington, the government have been playing a little bit more hardball, behaving more like an insurance company than fully supporting the recovery. So they do look for the cheapest possible route, should we say, in more recent times, because they are running out of money.
I guess Andrew hit it on the head though. We're talking the Milford Huts. What are we actually doing to relieve our risk there, being that this is a long-term plan? What discussions are we having with those hut owners, what their expectations might be?
Yeah, so we have, or we'll be starting conversations with those ones this year. So, in part, it's understanding what they're going to do as well, and I'm interested to know, you know, are they giving thought to environmental cleanup as an example, and who's, you know, what's their expectation on who's going to fund that, and so I mean the opportunity here too is for us to, you know, potentially, you know, build a policy in around what we will and won't do, and I think it's to be quite definitive, and so those people know that actually we're not going to come and rescue them, and they have liability, and yeah, I think the opportunity is to put a line in the sand and say, hey, actually there's a fair chance you have to meet your legal obligations, yeah, and that councils and government aren't going to come and rescue you. And remember, all these things are a choice. We all make a choice, don't we, on where we live. And sometimes it's for, you know, reasons of, you know, socio-economic reasons, effectively. But it is a choice, and there's consequences with those choices and actions. And so,
South Shore resident for 17 years.
Your Worship, at the Civil Defence meeting on Friday, we had John Price, who's the Director of Civil Defence at NEMA, speak, and he gave us the sobering assessment that Lloyd's had conducted a review and of countries exposed to natural risk, because it's not just flood, it's earthquake, it's fire, and we're exposed to all of those here. And New Zealand ranks, of all the countries in the world, number 2 behind Bangladesh. So we do well to be really mindful of those risks, because they sit for all of us, and that natural disaster risk for us, whether it's really high wind, whether it's fire, which could occur at the same time, flood or earthquake, they are all there, and they could visit very, very substantial costs on our communities. And you're quite right, after the Christchurch earthquakes, the government did start looking at how it managed its exposure to those costs, if I put it politely.
I was just thinking, so yeah, I'll probably find out the insurance company's going to set the tone. They won't be able to finance. So, you know, and I guess that's where it comes down to us to ensure we've got those boundaries lines set, basically saying this is what's okay and what's not okay, and therefore people make decisions based around those.
Agreed. Pandemics, we're basing the assumption that there's going to be future pandemics. The World Health Organization has 10 viruses and bacterial infections that they are monitoring currently. Those change all the time, but we're just saying chances are something's going to happen again. Whether or not we go into lockdown is another story, but we know that there will be future pandemics. Here we go, closely linked, natural hazards and emergency events. And we've identified those, and we've actually said you're particularly vulnerable here because of your braided rivers and your river mouth communities. And these will be more regular occurrences that actually make up a large part of your civil defense activity. Okay? And this one, this is where we're actually talking about the fourth industrial revolution or disruptive technology, and it will continue to improve and develop at a faster pace than any public sector entity can keep pace with. It will present challenges for cybersecurity and data integrity. So that is an assumption, and that is a fact that every organization and government agency faces in this world. So one of the things we can do is actually have more robust policy around the use of AI as an example, because AI, it doesn't think. So what happens is it can produce something beautifully written, but it may not be true. And AI can also lie because it can take credit for something that it didn't produce because it doesn't recognize whether it did it or not. It's advancing all the time, but it's just about having some safety protocols around the use of it in your organization. It is useful. You had 2 videos I used with AI, but I controlled every word they said. Okay, not the accent so much, but yes. So it can be a useful tool. Okay, Councillor.
Is that going to affect our staff requirements? Because, you know, as you know, IT and everything's getting smarter. I mean, you know, you'd think that that's what most companies are doing. They're constantly conscious of their costs and obviously still supplying the services.
So traditionally, technology has always replaced labor. It's about making things easier, less physically demanding. This new revolution is coming through, and it's actually replacing thought. And so it's evolving at a faster pace than we can keep up with, and it is a likelihood that there could be some industries impacted by this. The key to getting ahead is to ensuring that you have staff who are well adept to embrace the AI to use in their jobs, But rather than making people redundant, what it might do is increase efficiencies and make you to be able to deliver a better level of service, like consenting faster or writing reports faster or something like that. So I wouldn't go out with the idea that robots are going to replace us. We're a far cry from that. There's an excellent book written by Joe Cribb called Don't Be Scared of the Robots. I have a copy. I'm happy to loan it to anybody. We're not in that space just yet, okay? But we can use it to our advantage. Sorry.
Do you think we should be considering it with our representation review? Maybe we could replace a few seats around the table.
I mean, I think, Councillor Booth, I'm always reminded that when the computer first arrived, we were going to have less paper, and we know how that landed. I think what it will do, though, is change the dynamic and the skill set that people have, but there's still that element of it. And so if you go and look and use it, what you'll see is that element for critical thinking, but it can synthesise information at a phenomenal rate for you, and do an enormous amount of work that would have taken maybe a day or a week, it can do within seconds. But somebody's still got to go and analyse it. So to Vincey's point, the skill mix will change, but I think we've yet to see whether it does cut a vast swathe through the need for human resource. But at the moment, it's shortening stuff rapidly, but there's still someone, as to Vincey's point, has got to go and critique it and give it some critical thought.
In short, councillor, you're not getting rid of us yet. Okay. Resource availability. This is a tension felt everywhere, and it's universal. And so resources will continue to be under pressure for a considerable amount of time, although, you know, it was heartening to hear Councillor Booth talk about he's finding a bit more freedom and there's pressures alleviating. But we have trouble with being able to get contractors to be able to do some of the jobs, or staff retention. So those kind of resources are still under pressure, and we're anticipating that it's going to continue to be for a wee bit of time yet. So, but what we're trying to do, it's the mitigations that you do based on this assumption. So you're doing everything you can to make sure you have really adequate procurement policies and being able to help address with staff well-being initiatives, which this council goes to extraordinary measures around the well-being space. So this is just a reality that we have to deal with, and it's what we do to mitigate that we really need to focus on through the LTP. What do you think your big issues are?
Did we not do a vote on these and we ranked them?
No, you guys just basically have a discussion, have an open discussion. This is free form.
Yeah, but previous to this to an email, we had to rank issues or big issues for us. So we did that as part of the LTP.
No,
process.
you ranked priorities. You had
pardon.
focus areas underneath all your community outcomes, and you ranked priorities for your strategic framework, which I fed back to you. Now, this is not something you decide today. This is me planting the seed that I need you to start thinking. So the next workshop we have, I believe, is the 12th of September. And I'm going to come back and ask you, I've given you time to think about the big issues, talk to your constituents, reflect, talk with each other. What is it that you think we need to be focusing on? And we're talking about things within the council realm. If you came back to me and said, I think we have a real issue with education and healthcare, I'll go, that's awesome to hear that feedback. How can you impact on that space? And short of advocacy, very little. So I want you to think about, under your realm and your sphere of influence, what is it that you can actually help to put into this LTP to address what concerns you most? What keeps you up at night? Okay. That brings me to a conclusion to my workshop. Are there any questions, counselors? I've given you more homework already.
Did you take climate change off that?
Counselors, you're more than free to email me at any point in time. I'm expecting edits and recommendations to what you want changed in some of the narrative in here. This is your document. It is absolutely your document. But any changes that you bring, I will bring back to you as a group to decide upon, okay? I'd like to introduce Miles O'Connor from Bancorp, who is now going to talk to you about the quarterly report, and is a great person to ask some of those economic questions you had at the start of the workshop. Counselors, thank you for your time, thank you for engaging, and thank you for doing your background research. Very appreciated. Have a good day.